Welcome to the Best Books Podcast, an Orchard Hill Church podcast that helps you choose your next book. I'm your host, Jonathan Thiede, and today I'm privileged to be joined by someone who's still a fairly new face to our staff, someone that I've really enjoyed getting to know. Please welcome to the show for episode 23, Director of Kids Ministry, Katie Drennen. Katie, how's it going?
It's pretty good. I'm excited to be here. I'm a huge fan of the pod.
Yeah, sounds good. We're happy to have you, and happy to have you on staff, happy to have you on the podcast. So maybe just as we start, we like to sort of get to know the person who's coming on. So take us through your walk with the Lord growing up. What was it like sort of growing up, and then how did God call you to the current position that you have now?
Yeah, totally. I grew up going to church, actually a really teeny tiny Lutheran church I grew up going to, and I really have nothing but fond memories. I really enjoyed going to church. I remember loving it and having fun, but I really did not maybe understand a lot of what I was being taught. It wasn't until mid to late high school that I feel like I really understood the gospel for the first time, and it really clicked for me, really changed my life. And yeah, kind of looking back, it's kind of a funny story, but I just had great friends in high school that really knew Jesus and trusted him a lot. And just little things, I feel like I watched them go through breakups or hard tests or hard seasons of life, and I watched them walk through those seasons in such a different way than I would have. I remember seeing them pray about it, journal about it, bring their Bible into school, and just really lean into God in that way. And I remember really distinctly, I think my junior year of high school, just looking at that and being like, they have something that I do not have, and they really are friends with Jesus, and I really need that. I really want that. So that's kind of where it shifted for me. And going into college, I remember feeling really excited to share my faith with others. I remember thinking, man, I really wish I would have had someone when I was younger, in middle school or high school, to really explain the gospel to me. So that's kind of how I got involved with Young Life in college, which was a really fun experience. That ministry is really sweet. And I led high school at Upper St. Clair for 3 or 4 years, all through college, which was fun. I feel like I learned a lot through that. So that was kind of my story.
Nice.
And then
what did you enjoy about Young Life?
That's a good question. It was really challenging. I didn't even really know what Young Life was. I didn't have it at my high school. And as I was exiting high school, gearing up for college, my cousin actually met the Lord through Young Life at his high school, and he was like, you should think about leading. And I said, what's that? But somehow I got connected at Duquesne, which is where I went to school, and it just ended up working out. I think I really enjoyed, which it kind of ties into this book, but Young Life does a great job of explaining the gospel in a really simple way, and it's really relational, which I think ultimately is how the gospel made sense for me the first time, just understanding that it's a relationship with Jesus, that it's a friendship, and that he really wants to be in your life and walking with you. So I think, just how Young Life leans into that relational part of it so much, I think I really enjoyed, because that's kind of how it made sense for me the first time. And yeah, it was a great opportunity to learn the simple truths of the gospel by explaining that to high schoolers for the first time. So that was really fun. And I learned a lot, but definitely challenging, definitely kind of outside of my comfort zone for sure. But I really enjoyed that. And then that's kind of leading into how I ended up at Orchard Hill, which I'm not sure if that's where you're going, but
go for it.
I knew Dan Irvin, which a lot of people might know that name through Young Life. And then I was also attending the Strip District campus of Orchard Hill all through college, which I loved. And I was at my previous job, which is a speech therapist. It's a completely different career. But I was at my old job working at an elementary school, and I got a text from Dan, and he said, would you be interested in this job at all? And I said, well, I don't know. It's kind of different from what I am doing, but I maybe think about it. And just kind of one thing led to another. It just kind of felt right. But yeah, it was kind of random.
Yeah.
Not really something I sought out, but
yeah, maybe talk about that a little bit more. So what interested you about this opportunity?
Yeah, totally. It was really not on my bingo card. I was kind of, I went to school for speech therapy, and I was working in elementary school with kindergarten through third grade, and I really enjoyed that a lot. I love working with kids, and I felt like that was just a sweet spot for me. I remember through college, I kind of was unsure about my career path of choice. I remember being kind of like, I don't really know why I'm doing this or if I want to do this. But as time went on, as I got into my job actually working, I really grew to love it a lot. I felt like just was really meaningful to help kids understand how to communicate and how to relate to others. A lot of that like social part of it was really fun for me, just to help them be able to have, healthy relationships and friendships. So I grew to really love it. But it's funny because when I was talking to some of my friends about this opportunity that came up with Orchard Hill, I'm saying, oh, I don't know, like maybe I should switch. That'd be a pretty big career pivot though for me. A lot of my friends were like, you've always said you wanted to do something in ministry. And I was like, no, I haven't. Have I? So I think part of me has maybe always kind of wanted to do something like that. But it's been fun. I feel like I use my brain in lots of new ways, and it's been challenging. But it's sweet, though, because working in a school, you don't always get that opportunity to share truth, to share the gospel with kids. So it's been sweet for that switch to be, still working with kids, but kind of get to help them in a different way. So.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. It seems like God really sort of stirred that passion in that season, and now you're able to use that in just a different way.
Yeah, it's been sweet.
Yeah. What's something most people don't know about you?
It's a good question, and I kind of struggle with that question because I tend to be kind of an open book. I feel like most people...
It's not a bad thing. That's not a bad problem to have.
I don't keep secrets very well, but I think something most people don't know is I worked on a flower farm all through high school, and I loved it. It was like the best experience. It was so hard. It was like
what
weeding.
Kind of stuff did you do? Oh,
Weeding. Mostly weeding.
Yeah,
there was some
just
planting,
nice.
Picking flowers, which was really fun.
Yeah.
They would like sell them at markets and that kind of thing. So it was picking in like mass quantities, but it was just a blast. I feel like I learned so much, and it was just outside the whole time.
It was like going into a time machine or something.
Yeah.
I've never been on a flower farm, so.
No, it was. They grew other stuff too, but it was mostly flowers, and I think I really grew to love flowers from that experience too. I feel like I learned all the names, and that's been kind of like a passion of mine. And I, once I graduated high school, I stopped working that job, but over the years I've gotten to work for a few different florists with like wedding flowers, not anything serious, but that's just like a fun hobby of mine, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
that was fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. Mm-hmm. So today we're talking about this book called Hinds Feet on High Places by Hannah Hurnard. That's the pronunciation.
Your guess is as good as mine. That sounds right.
I'm going for. So, and this book is for any follower of Christ who wants their heart to be stirred by this beautiful allegory that she's written. So, along those lines, this is my surprise question I didn't prepare you for. What's like the longest journey you've ever been on? Because a big part of this story is this journey that she goes on.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Doesn't have to be on foot, but.
No, that's a really good question. So not on foot, maybe. Let's see. My family and I just went to Montana this past summer, and we did a lot of hiking. So maybe that was like a big, long journey that we went on, and that was fun. Lots of planning and lots of fun hiking, lots of driving. There was this one day, actually, that we went on this hike that ended up being a drive up a really bumpy trail. I'm talking like I thought our car was going to break because it was so bumpy.
Yeah.
And I was kind of miserable the whole time. I was saying, what are we doing? Let's just kind of go back somewhere where it's not like this. And we ended up getting to this little, flat area in a valley where there was a beautiful lake. It was like by far everyone's favorite day of the whole week.
Yeah.
There was like no one there. It was just our family, maybe a few other little families, and it was like this beautiful lake that we could just paddleboard around. So that was a really long journey, and I hated it during the bumpy parts, but it was worth it.
Yeah. You felt like you really experienced this book in real time.
Yes.
The view from the top was well worth it.
Yeah, totally.
So why did you choose this book? Let's just start there.
That's another good question. This is probably my favorite book. I'm not like a massive reader, but I've read this book probably like 5 or 6 times.
Yes. Yeah.
It's really good. I just checked as I was preparing for this podcast. I checked back in my Amazon cart. I bought it like 7 times because I read it.
And you give it away.
And then I give it away to someone, and then I read it and I give it away. So it's really good. I feel like it just kind of landed in my lap at the right time in my life, and it was really impactful for me. It was really comforting.
Yeah.
So I feel like I go back to it when I just want to feel comforted, and I think it does kind of relate. I was thinking of ways that it can relate to kids ministry. It kind of doesn't, but it is written in like a really childlike way with a lot of simple truths, and I feel like there's been little quotes from it that have really stuck with me throughout the years. So yeah, it was just really an impactful book for me.
Yeah, we'll get into it in a second. But it was something I liked that it was, the characters are fairly like ageless. You know, it really, I would imagine, it makes sense to me that you've read it several times. So you can almost picture whatever season of life you're in. You can imagine this character much afraid. You know, if you were reading it and you were 10, you know, you could imagine her as a 10-year-old or that kind of thing. So,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'd never really thought about that till just now. But yeah,
no,
I think
that's well said.
They do a nice job of not confining it to this is so and so, they're 30 years old, you know, whatever. So
yeah,
if you were to give this book like a topic, I think with narratives like this, it's kind of hard to put your finger on it because there's so many different themes going on. But if you were to give this book, you know, a topic, I guess a better way to phrase that is if someone saw you reading this and they said, "Hey, what's that book about?" How would you explain it?
It is funny. It's hard to explain this book. Sometimes people will ask me like, "Oh, what's that about?" It is like a little bit of a funny topic because there's so many topics all mixed in. I feel like maybe just walking with God or trusting God is maybe a good topic that's kind of all-encompassing, but yeah, I don't know. It is hard to kind of pinpoint that, but
yeah, the analogy of, you know, her journey, our journey sort of thing. We're walking with God. We're going through trials and tragedy, and just how does God see us in the middle of those trials and tragedy, even when they're our fault? You know, I think there's so many of those sort of themes going on. One question I wanted to ask you is, I've only really ever heard this book talked about by friends who are females. So do you feel like this is a girly book? Like, do you feel like is there some, I mean, I can say in my experience, I'm kind of answering your question, but like I got surprisingly a lot out of it. But I'm sort of starting to wonder, like, why is that? You know, why isn't this book more, I don't know, well known among everyone?
I've wondered that too. It does have a really emotional vibe to it, I would say, for lack of a better word. I think it has a really emotional vibe. It's very poetic.
Right.
So maybe that is why. I don't want to speak for all the men, but I feel like sometimes men don't, like, it doesn't resonate with them as well to read like a poem.
Right.
I definitely feel like, I mean, maybe I'm just a like emotional person. I am, but I think I resonate a lot with poetry or just like really, I don't know. This book there's all kind of sewn throughout it. There's little songs and little poems that I feel like stick with me, and I value that a lot. So I don't think it's a girly book. I would recommend it to anybody. Yeah. But I agree. I feel like everyone I know who has read it is a girl, but I think it would be good for everyone. It's good to, I was wondering what you would think of it. So 'cause I don't think I've really had any guys read it, and I haven't like talked to them about it. But
no, I've been talking it up. I mean, I think that's why I'm glad we're doing it for this podcast, so more people can be aware of it. Are you familiar with Pilgrim's Progress at all?
So it's funny. My sister's just reading that right now.
Gotcha.
And just a few weeks ago, she said, "This is the same story as Hinds Feet." And I said, "Oh, that's crazy. I had never heard of that." So I don't really know which one came first, but I know that they're really similar.
Yeah, I have no doubt that Hannah Hurnard was very deeply impacted by Pilgrim, because Pilgrim's Progress is like
Yeah,
John
I'm
Bunyan's
sure
from the 1600s or something.
Okay,
It's an
okay.
old book, yeah. And I think I did some research. I think this was like mid 1900s, maybe 1970s.
Yeah, I think it
something
was
like
the
that.
50s, maybe
50s,
50s,
okay.
60s. Yeah.
And I don't know about your version, but I thought my version had a really cool thing at the end, which, sorry, I did not read, but she explained sort of how the book came about. So for anyone who's listening who's interested in that sort of stuff, it is very cool. But yeah, I thought I'd ask if you'd read Pilgrim's Progress, because I do agree with your sister. Like, it's very, very similar. I would say this is, like you said, more emotional in its use of language. But that was something I really appreciated about, because we don't often, I think it's a helpful practice to imagine Jesus and how would he talk to me? How would he interact with me? You know, how would I look him in the eye? Would I, so all this stuff, especially in the middle of failings, I think that alone was like the value of the book, just seeing like, man, Jesus is so gentle.
Yeah,
I think
totally.
that really stuck out to me.
I mean, no allegory is perfect.
Right.
So there are like parts of the story where you're like, well, I don't
You're like rolling your eyes a
yeah.
little bit, yeah.
But yeah, totally. I think there's really vivid imagery in the book that helped a lot for me to understand just Jesus' character a little bit more.
Being reminded of his love for us.
Yeah.
So before we get deep into the book, one question I think is just helpful. I had to look this up, so I'm just going to assume people don't know this word. What are Hinds Feet? Like, the book is called Hinds Feet on High Places. That's one of the plot points of the book is, Jesus tells her, the shepherd tells her, like, you have to have hinds feet. So I mean, if you don't know, that's totally fine too. Yeah.
No, it's a good question. I feel like when I say the title out loud, I always get someone being like, Hinds Feet? What is it? So, I mean, it's referring to like the back legs of a deer, which the first time I read this book, I actually really, for most of the book, was picturing Much Afraid, the main character, as a little deer, which I don't know why. But yeah, it's referring to the hinds feet, the back feet of a deer, and kind of correlating that to that the deer need like their hinds feet to be able to climb up a really challenging mountain path. At least I think that's kind of where they're getting at with that. And they're kind of symbolizing those hinds feet as our like spiritual strength or our spiritual confidence as we walk through life.
Yeah, I wrote down sort of like an overview of the story, but in this moment, I'm just now realizing that if we just give people an overview, that might disincentivize them to read. So instead, I just want to kind of pick up where you just left off and just give people sort of a bird's eye view. So there's this character, Much Afraid. She lives in the valley of humiliation. As you can tell if you're listening or watching, there's a lot of symbolism. Sometimes it's hard to like keep track of all this thing. Maybe keep Chat GPT nearby. Be like, hey, remind me of all these characters, how they interact. So Much Afraid lives with really a lot of pretty dreadful people. People who are making her much afraid. People who are making her life miserable. And one day, before the story even starts, she meets this guy who is just called the Shepherd, and he's this person who has always sort of promised, like, hey, if you ever want to take me up on it, I can lead you to the top of that mountain, because they live their whole life in this valley where they can sort of see the mountain, but they have no idea what it's like up there. And so one day she gets the courage to go with him, and some of her neighbors help her sort of escape, and the rest of the book is them climbing the mountain. There's also conflict with the other characters who are trying to get her to come back and tempt her to come back. So anything else that I'm missing?
No, totally. I think you kind of hit all of those main points for sure. But one of my favorite parts of the book is right as they're about to make this ascent onto the journey in the mountains, the chief shepherd, who's representing God in the story, gives Much Afraid, the main character, these two companions to walk with her throughout the journey, and it's sorrow and suffering. Right. And her reaction to that was like, what do you mean you're giving me sorrow and suffering to go through this big, terrible journey that I'm about to go on? And that was really impactful for me the first time I read it. I remember just thinking like, I totally get that. Like when you're going through something hard, you think, well, why couldn't I be given just like peace and joy to go through this and not like weeping and sorrow and suffering, which I don't want to spoil the book, but that is like a big part of the story of sorrow and suffering being like true companions and like tools for Much Afraid as she goes through all of those challenges. But
Yeah, and I think that hits on a theme that you really see throughout, which is much afraid's expectations for how the journey will go versus the really the dreadful reality. Like I feel like there's so many different turns where, and we experience this in our own lives, right? Where it's like, well, I'm glad I'm done with that sort of chapter, and really it's I can see I can see the mountain, it's going to go very easily from here. And man, it's like time. It almost seems like she has to go lower and lower in order to gain any ground. And of course, trying hard not to spoil it or anything.
Yeah.
But that's a major theme where she just assumes, hey, like I'm just going to ascend this mountain, and very quickly, one of the first couple chapters after she even embarks, it's like, oh, like we're actually going to stop going up and we're going to start going down.
Yeah.
And so she's like, I think trusting God is a big theme in that, because she has to, trust that's the correct path.
that's a hard thing to learn in the Christian walk to understand. And I definitely haven't totally grasped this. I'm super forgetful. I feel like when life gets hard, I forget it again. But it's a huge thing to understand that God's plan for your life, God's will for your life is more trustworthy than the one that you want for your life. And that's like just so challenging, and I think always will be, but it is sweet to kind of have those stories like this that you can kind of relate to it and understand it a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah, another theme along those lines is, I think, the necessity of trials. Like, I think it's so cool how the author, she just every detail matters, and you don't realize in the moment like why she's bringing something up, but then so I think the best example, and I don't feel like I'm spoiling too much because they say this in the beginning, she asks him like, can't you just take me to the mountain, I love that realism from the character, because it's like we all have that. It's like, God, why do I even exist on the earth? Like, why couldn't you just and he says, I could, he says I could bring you to the top, but then you wouldn't have the Hinds Feet to be able to actually move around and to walk with me once you're there. And so I love how just like the trials are actually forming her into this person that's going to be able to be with God. And I think of that because I think so often when we're going through trials, we kind of have that self-pity of like, man, woe is me. Like God has basically given me these purposeless trials. But I think a story like this reminds you, like, no matter what you're going through right now, God's going to use that to make you a more compassionate, more helpful friend to someone else who could be going through that.
Oh, absolutely. The first time I read this book, I was going through a really gnarly breakup.
Sure.
And so a lot of the truths in this book were really comforting to me just because of the nature of that, like pain and hardship. But I remember there was a quote, I think it's towards the end of the book, and it's still one to this day that I think of all the time. And it was so short and sweet, but just, it is happy to go low. And I remember that just being really impactful for me, just thinking about, like, I am feeling low right now, but it actually is like a happy thing to be able to go low with the Lord and to like have those moments where you're really learning and leaning on Him. So, yeah.
Yeah, for someone sort of listening to this, someone who's going through something that they never thought they'd go through, like, how do you think a book like this could help encourage them?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think this is a good book for anyone at any time, because life is always hard.
Sure.
Even when it's good, like, life is just, it can be really brutal.
Yeah.
But definitely going through any sort of pain or loss or just like maybe confusion about life in general, this book can be really comforting. It offered me a lot of just peace in knowing that God promises to be with you. You see all throughout the journey, which I don't want to spoil too much, but Much Afraid goes through the whole journey, and she's, hitting these really low points where she, calls out to God, and He's there in an instant, and He's with her, offering her truth. And I think that just like really encouraged me a lot. And the way the story kind of unfolds, where Much Afraid is sort of transformed into this like new character, I think that really impacted me a lot when I was going through something hard, of just like, this is transforming me into a new version of myself where I can trust God more, and I can trust that His plan is better than my own, which that's huge as far as like just walking through life, because life is challenging.
Yeah,
So
definitely. Yeah, one of the coolest things I thought, and I think this is a good sort of wrapping up point, something I actually didn't see coming, because throughout the book she has these enemies, and as you're reading them, you probably hate them even more than Much Afraid does. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, like, can't these people just leave her alone? Like, she's like, it's kind of funny, because you would think she goes on this journey, you would think they would just be like, whatever, but they like send out basically this team like, hey, go bring her back. And it's like, why do you care what she's doing? You know, get out of her business. But they like follow her so far just to like continually to discourage her. And that's one of the major themes. And then, you know, toward the end, you know, you really start to see Much Afraid really, as these truths of how God has loved her start to click, you know, she feels pity for them, you know, and I think that's one of the coolest things toward the end of the book is how she's transformed, and how her, not only is she transformed in that, she gets the Hinds Feet and she's able to move and to follow God on this journey, but she actually starts to, her heart starts to break for others in the valley of humiliation, and how much, you know, that speaks to us in our situation of, so easy we get the first part right, but then, I don't know, it's easy to look at people that look and behave just like us before we knew the Lord, and it's very easy to judge those people, and yet I think it's just a reminder of like, that's often we're harsher with people than God is even, you know, in those situations.
Totally. And there's actually a sequel to this book called Mountains of Spices.
I'll see you next year. Mountains of Spices.
Mountains of Spices. Gotcha. And that book actually takes you on the journey of Much Afraid going back to the Valley of Humiliation now that she's been transformed to this new version of herself. And the whole story follows her trying to befriend all of these people that she once, you know, really resented and disliked, hated even. And she's then showing them that they need to know the shepherd. They need to know the Lord. And totally having pity on them instead of that kind of resentful mindset that we saw in this book. And it's actually a really sweet story. I really would recommend it, because throughout the story, the shepherd will take Much Afraid to all these different mountains, and each mountain is representing a different fruit of the Spirit. So then it goes with her on her journey, you know, interacting with her aunt, Miss Dismal Forebodings, and trying to help her, you know, understand the truths of the gospel, and it's sweet.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for the time, Katie. We've been talking to Katie Drennen about Hannah Hurnard's book, Hinds Feet on High Places. We really hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you really enjoyed it, we do ask that you send this to someone that you think would enjoy, someone that you think would really be encouraged to hear about a book like this. This is going to help other people find this podcast and help them, invite them into these conversations, which is going to help us put more of these books into people's hands, which in turn will help people find and follow Jesus. Please join us next time as we talk with ministry associate Matt Wicks about a book that's made an impact on his life and ministry. Until then, I'm Jonathan Thiede, and this has been Best Books.